Hey, DawgNation, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Before we get going on the real show today, I wanted to say a special shout-out and a thank you to Jack DeLoach, watching in from Port Wentworth, Georgia, down south. Sent me this beautiful Georgia, it's like a birdhouse, basically. Really cool stuff. I got the SEC championship thing up here from 2017. I actually really, really like this. This is an incredible gift, and I'm honored to be able to put that out on my desk right now. So, Jack, thank you so much for sending that, and I just really appreciate that. It's a very, very nice gesture, and what a surprise that was yesterday to see that come mailed into me. Really good times on that front, so thank you so much for that. Also, thank you all of you for being with us today. Fun show today, special guest coming up. I'll tell you about that. This is going to be a really good conversation on a number of fronts, but I want to begin the show with a little gloating about those lousy, stinking Gators. I love doing that this time of year, and I hope you'll join me for it as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I believe the events of the last couple of days show that our friends down south in Gainesville, Florida, have got a long way to go towards climbing back to relevancy in the SEC. Now, I have to admit a couple of things. First of all, this is kind of petty gloating on my part, and I'm not necessarily proud of that, but I also can't deny who I am. I do like having fun at Florida's expense. I think we have an opportunity to do that a bit off the top of the program today. As I say from time to time, I wish I was a better person than this. I wish I was the kind of person that could be above the fray when it comes to this kind of stuff, but I am not. I like Florida fans being in a bad mood. I like Florida fans being unhappy, and I think we get another chance to kind of enjoy some of that here today. So not proud of it necessarily, but as Popeye the Southern Man once said, I guess I am what I am, or whatever it was that he was famous for saying. But on a more, I guess, real front, this is also meant to be a bit of a conversation to combat what's going to happen a lot this spring and summer. There is going to be a lot of Florida is back talk. Y'all know I'm kind of an old school guy. I like to read the preseason magazines. They'll start hitting newsstands around Memorial Day weekend or something like that. And in a lot of these magazines and things like that, you know, when these, national media types make their parade around the radio shows and whatnot, there's going to be a lot of watch out for Florida, Peach Bowl winner, top 10 final ranking, even ranked ahead of Georgia. There's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff used as evidence that Florida is on its way back. And then in 2019, Florida stands as a legitimate threat to Georgia in the SEC East. I don't quite think that's the case as of yet. And I hate to say that because Dan Mullen has been really trying to push the opposite narrative. You know, he has tried to speak a lot about his connection to Florida's great past. And no doubt, listen, even a Gator hater like me has to acknowledge, when you win multiple national championships with two different coaches, when you have multiple Heisman Trophy winners, Florida has been a great program. But that program is kind of a long time ago. The best of the Gators, the best what this program has been, that's kind of a long time ago. So when Dan Mullen takes the job and starts speaking in lofty terms about the Gator standard, some of that, for me, kind of falls a little hollow maybe. In fact, here is Dan Mullen trying to pledge his desire, his belief that Florida was going to be right back to where it was, maintaining, as he calls it, that very high Gator standard. Here's Dan Mullen from last summer.
I'm excited to build that standard back, get the Gator standard back to where everyone expects it to be. When you think of the Gator standard, you're thinking about a university of excellence. Everything about the Gator standard is excellence, whether it's academics, athletics, research. The University of Florida stands for excellence, and that's the Gator standard. And I want to make sure I get our football program back on top and continue that excellence of where we've been.
So I know it sounds like I'm not being helpful, but to the Florida fan who might be listening in, let me actually try to be a little helpful here for a moment. That the road that Dan Mullen is traveling down is one that Kirby Smart has been traveling down over the last few years. And here's the lesson I think that Georgia has learned along the way with Kirby Smart as he gets ready to go into year 4. Just because you want it to happen and just because you believe it will happen doesn't mean that it actually will. There is no inheritance in college football. There is no birthright. You're not born with a silver spoon in your mouth in college football. That just because you're the coach at Georgia that you're going to get all the spoils and riches of success just because that's what you think it's supposed to be for Georgia. It's not that easy. It hasn't been that easy for Kirby Smart. He said to fight, scratch, and claw for everything that he's gotten, including a trip to the college football playoff in 2017, an SEC championship in 2017, back-to-back SEC East the last couple of years. Georgia has had to fight, scratch, and claw for all of that, including the players on the recruiting trail that have made that possible. And now Georgia is trying to fight its way up the next rung of that ladder, and trust me, that's even more difficult than the previous ones have been. That's the lesson that Kirby Smart has learned in real time on the job. So for Dan Mullen to go from a place like Mississippi State, where really there's no winning and no expectation for winning, to a place like Florida where there is that expectation, just because the expectation exists, and to use his own word, just because the standard exists, doesn't mean you are naturally going to inherit the previous success of Urban Meyer or Steve Spurrier or anybody like that. That's the lesson that Dan Mullen's about to learn, and frankly, he may be going to learn it the hard way. Which brings us to the news of the last couple of days. Georgia winning with the 4-star quarterback Carson Beck, getting his commitment after a very successful, apparently, visit this past weekend. Beck had been a guy because of his geographic location right there from the Jacksonville, Florida area. Beck had been a guy thought to be a Florida lean. Yet Georgia swoops in and just takes him as if it was candy from a baby. And if you're a Florida fan, I thought that Michael Carvell did a good job of kind of chronicling some of this at DawgNation.com. For a lot of Florida fans, they were legitimately upset that Georgia was able to swoop in and get a quarterback so quickly that Florida thought it was going to be able to get. I thought that Beck was really interesting when he made an appearance on one of the Jacksonville news stations. I apologize for not remembering which one now, but I'll make sure I put a link to this on the world-famous DawgNation.com. We post DawgNation daily a little bit later on today. Beck was kind of asked about that from the local reporter saying, wait a second, I thought you were supposed to be a Florida lean. That was the kind of the rumor that was out there, that you were destined to end up at Florida. And Beck gave a very honest response, and for most Gator fans, they're not going to like it. Here's Carson Beck on his relationship with Florida and ultimately the decision to commit to Georgia. Listen.
I had obviously named Florida as my leader, and I kind of just put that out there to say, hey, this is the team that's coming at me the hardest. This is the team where I feel like I could see myself at. But also I had two schools kind of in the back of my head, one of those being Georgia, where if I got that offer, I would pause for a second and say, okay, hold on, I got to kind of take this in. So I visited up there, and it was absolutely awesome and everything that I expected.
So he says another school, the two schools. We're going to presume that's Alabama and have more on that in just a moment. But for Beck, speaking to the local Jacksonville TV station, it's hard not to come away from that quote almost making it sound like I kind of dangled that Florida interest out there, almost like I was using Florida, if you're Beck, to get some more interest from some other programs, I guess maybe Georgia included. And Georgia does swoop in quick, impresses him quick, makes the offer, he accepts that, and he gets the commitment. If you're a Florida fan, I don't know how this could be anything other than demoralizing, but I think it does speak to the gap that exists, and frankly, I think it's important to say still exists when it comes to Georgia and Florida on the recruiting process. And gaps in recruiting lead to gaps on the field. For Georgia, who's won the last two games in Florida in blowout fashion, I think the recent events on the recruiting trail suggest that that's not likely to change on the field anytime soon. Taking this a step further, I thought it was interesting what Tom Van Haren wrote at ESPN.com about the commitment when Beck, who actually had been at one point in time committed to Alabama, basically recently decommitted from Alabama before coming up with the Georgia class. Van Haren on the ESPN, his assessment of the entire thing is for Georgia beating the Gators for a top recruit in the Sunshine State's a big enough win for Georgia, he writes. But even more, his commitment to Georgia continues a recruiting battle between the Dogs and the Tide that has intensified since Kirby Smart took over as head coach at Georgia. That is Tom Van Haren from ESPN, and I think that Tom is making a pretty good point there, that if you're listening to me right now and it sounds like I'm, kind of touting Georgia's advantage over Florida in recruiting, obviously part of that's just in fun because around here we believe that Georgia fans are supposed to be Gator haters. But the actual purpose of the topic is not to say that Georgia has no foes, no enemies in recruiting. The purpose of this conversation is not to say that Georgia's got nothing to worry about when it comes to recruiting. As Tom Van Haren says, The Alabama war with Georgia is still very intense, and frankly, Alabama still gets its share of the players, including back in the 2019 class, some individual names you could point to that Georgia would have really liked to have had. Also, when you listen to Jeff Sintel talk, including Before the Hedges presented by Kroger yesterday afternoon, there's no shortage of Georgia versus Clemson battles going on head-to-head. So my purpose in having this conversation off the top of the show is not to tell you that Georgia has nothing to worry about when it comes to recruiting. It's still got a couple formidable foes that are certainly arch nemesis. My point, though, is to say that Florida's not one of those programs right now. And no matter how much the Gators fans may try to talk this offseason, and no matter how much they may, celebrate some of the recent success they've had on the field, it's important to remind that success has not come against Georgia, nor do we think that's going to change in 2019. There is still a gigantic chasm separating Georgia from Florida, and I believe the rest of the SEC East. And on field this season, there will be more evidence supplied that proves just that. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us today, no matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, radio at noon as well, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form, pretty much wherever you find podcasts. We're just really glad to have you find us today here on DawgNation Daily. Coming up in a couple of minutes, we have got a really fun interview, a guy that I've been looking to have on the program for a while. It's good to have him back. It's the legendary former quarterback of the Georgia Bulldogs, Buck Bellew. Now, there's a couple different things I'm going to get into with Buck. As a former quarterback, I'm curious to find out Buck's thoughts on Beck. Say that 10 times fast. We just talked about Carson Beck a bit. Buck Bellew, I'm curious to see what he's seen from this young man. We'll let him share that. Buck also recently had a one-on-one interview with Kirby Smart. Some interesting things came from Smart in that discussion. I'll get Buck's perspective from having spoken with Kirby in that one-on-one discussion about kind of how Kirby sees the sort of status of his team during this offseason. And it's been a hot topic in our program the last couple of days. The future of the field at Sanford Stadium, should it be renamed in honor of Vince Dooley? Well, if anyone's going to have a strong opinion on that, it's going to be Buck, who won a national championship as quarterback with Vince Dooley back in 1980. So we'll let Buck weigh in on that, too. I'm actually really interested to get his thoughts on that. So we'll do all of that coming up. Also, now let's go around the doghouse here today, presented by Online Trading Academy. And yesterday, I mentioned that we had Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, and what a really interesting discussion that was with Jeff Sintel off the top of the program, where we kind of addressed some of the big issues facing Georgia now, that one of the big questions would seemingly been answered. That Georgia has a 2020 quarterback in the fold. It is Carson Beck. Beck looks to be one of the premier players at that position for the country. So will Georgia still go after a Robbie Ashford? Will it still put out some feelers with a DJ Uiagalelei? Maybe it will. Maybe that's part of this discussion. But it looks like Georgia fans have a quarterback they ought to be very satisfied with when it comes to Beck. So that's a question for the moment answered. But what else is out there? And one of the things that came up is, well, how many 5 stars could Georgia ultimately sign for its 2020 class? And as Jeff started rattling off his information, I guess none of it is individually all that surprising, but when you collect it together into one opinion, it is really eye-opening that Georgia, who has blazed some real trails with its 2017, 18, and 19 recruiting classes, could be in a position in 2020 to do even more than it's done thus far under Kirby Smart. And listen as Jeff kind of goes through the realistic possibilities of 5 stars. Now, even someone like me will admit that Georgia's not going to get all these guys, but the fact that it's got a real chance for at least there's not a single name you're about to hear that Georgia doesn't have a real chance for. This gets you excited about what the spring and summer is going to be like, with visitors coming up for G-Day, with a whole bunch of recruiting news as it kind of always bubbles up there in that June and July period. Let's get excited about the 2020 class, and let's let Jeff Sintel set the stage for that as part of Around the Doghouse here, presented by Online Trading Academy.
I would still say Zachary Evans. I would still say Kendall Milton. I would still say Marshawn Lloyd. Carson Beck, I think, could possibly move up to a 5-star. Then you've got Broderick Jones, who's already committed to the Georgia program as a 5-star. You're already at 5. Then you start looking at a guy like Rakeem Jarrett, St. John's College. Mikhail Sherman, his teammate at St. John's College out of D.C. Darnell Washington, we just mentioned him in our program there out of Desert Pines, Nevada. Arik Gilbert, number 9. I think a guy like Jermaine Burton is also a guy that could come into the class. He's knocking on the door, Brandon. He's the number 35 overall prospect in the country right now. wide receiver. Grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, used to play at Hateville Charter. That already puts us at 10. Brian Brzee is 11. I think the number of 5 stars, Justin Rogers, makes it 12. I think Georgia has more than a puncher's chance or a good puncher's chance with about 13, 14 5 stars. I think Georgia can nail 6 or 7 of those. I really do.
I mean, 13 or 14 5-stars sounds like it should be an exaggeration. But when Jeff mentions off the individual names, for those of you that follow UGA recruiting, which one of those is the chances unrealistic with, including the idea that Carson Beck could eventually grow into 5-star status, or Jermaine Burton could grow into that and eventually be signed by Georgia? Nothing that Jeff says individually is unrealistic. Now, Georgia's probably not going to clear the board with all of those names, but the fact that it's up at the plate with a chance to swing for the fences and all those guys, I think is a really good piece of news. I loved the way that Jeff set the table for what's going to be a fun spring and summer as this 2020 class starts to come together. Admittedly, Georgia's gotten off to a bit of a slower start than some of its SEC rivals, including LSU, who's already gotten massive commits from a ton of guys. But I think the recent events of Georgia recruiting show you that slow starts don't necessarily lead to underwhelming finishes, and I think the 2020 class is going to be another example of that. It's Around the Doghouse, presented by Online Trading Academy. We love Online Trading Academy here at DawgNation Daily because they provide professional instruction on how you can make money in the markets. And what could be more important than that? Students learn a step-by-step approach to trading and investing, and the classes cover a spectrum of trading styles and asset classes in the classroom and online. So invest in yourself today. Go to this website, tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. It's a great decision. What a great investment, and how much your family could benefit from for generations from your decision to do just that. All right, later on today on DawgNation Daily, we'll give away another Road to Atlanta t-shirt. For now, though, as promised, he is the legendary former quarterback of the Georgia Bulldogs and a terrific analyst of the game right now. It's Buck Bellew here on DawgNation Daily. So let's say hello to Buck Bellew, a great radio host in Atlanta, long time on 680 The Fan, and as a lot of our audience will remember, a terrific quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs. Buck, thank you so much for being back on DawgNation Daily. We really appreciate you making some time for us, and we hope you're doing well today. How are you?
Yeah, B.A., thanks so much, man. It's good to be with you.
Well, one of the things I want to talk to you about is on 680 The Fan this week, you had a terrific interview with Georgia coach Kirby Smart, so we'll look forward to hearing some from you on that. But before that, though, we were talking a little bit before about Carson Beck, the 4-star quarterback from Jacksonville, just committed to Georgia. Have you had a chance to see much film on Beck, and what do you think about a guy like this potentially being the heir apparent to Jake Fromm? Seems like there's some similarities there. What do you think of Beck based on what you've seen thus far?
Yeah, I did a little video analysis a few days ago and just came away really impressed. When we see a guy play, I don't know, B.A., I don't know if you're like this, but I always wonder, okay, well, what kind of comparison can I make with a guy that everybody knows, his style of play, his stature, way he throws the ball around, and I'm thinking Peyton Manning is who he reminded me of. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that he's going to have the career that Peyton Manning had, but he's a guy that's fundamentally sound in the pocket. He's got some pocket presence. I think he moves around a little better than Peyton has, but, I was just so impressed watching him stand in the pocket, move up in the pocket, move around, making all the throws. I was very impressed with the kid, so I think what we're going to see here is in a couple of years we're going to see he and Mathis compete for the job.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, Buck. I was looking at Washington State coach Mike Leach the other day, and he was talking about how his evaluation process for the quarterback position works. He obviously knows that position really well, and one of the things he brought up was the notion of accuracy. Now, when I watch Carson Beck, it seems like he's a pretty accurate quarterback. It seems like he puts it where it wants to go, and one of the things that Leach said was, if you're not accurate young, you're just not accurate. This is not the kind of thing that you grow into. As a guy that played the position, would you agree with that, and is that one of the things that you're looking at closely when you're paying attention to quarterbacks, whether it be Beck or anybody else?
Well, yeah, and that's the ultimate thing. I mean, you can't play if you can't hit the receiver. So, that's the priority. I look at these quarterbacks when I watch them, and you look to see about the arm strength and that kind of thing. And then, one thing I'm really big on is too, can you change it up? I mean, you're really not going to complete a lot of balls if all you do is just stand in there and throw a fastball at high velocity. You got to throw it with touch. A lot of the short stuff, on the intermediate stuff, you've got to loft the ball. into the holes in the coverage, so you got to loft it over the linebacker in front of the safety. And this kid was doing all of that. As far as the fundamentals go, what you'll see is everybody's a little bit different with their release and their footwork, but this kid was fundamentally sound, much like Peyton Manning is. So that's why the comparison goes to him.
I think it's really interesting. So you talked to Kirby Smart the other day, interview that's gotten some attention, and I think one of the things that to me was the most interesting about it is, and I don't know if there's any other way to say this, that Kirby Smart's just kind of downplaying the role of coordinator, saying that people like me who talk with this stuff for a living make too big of a deal about James Coley as offensive coordinator or Dan Lanning as defensive coordinator, and it's really, I think, I don't want to paraphrase too much, but almost like a job done by committee, that the defensive philosophy, the offensive philosophy is created by all the coaches on the staff. What did you make of what Kirby had to say about that?
Well, I think all these head coaches are a little bit different in their philosophy and so forth. But gosh, when you put together a coaching staff, I think it's always been underplayed in that it's going to be a collaboration with a lot of these coaches. You're going to talk through the personnel, the scheme, the opponent, how you're going to go about game planning. I just don't think Kirby is one of these coaches that is looking for an independent contractor. For example, like Dan Mullen down at Florida, he's hiring Grantham to come in and look, Todd, you handle that defensive side. You're over there in the West Wing. I'm going to stay here in the East Wing working on the offense, and we'll go get them on Saturday. Now, Kirby's not like that. Now, I don't think Nick Saban's like that either. I think he's going to have his hand in, all three aspects of the game. So with that aspect, Kirby is much like Saban when it comes to that.
It's hard for you mentioned being like Saban, and obviously that comes to mind for me as well, because it's hard for me to imagine that Kirby not saying a ton about Lanning, not even really announcing it officially, and kind of, I don't know, putting a lot of this, spreading out the responsibility with a lot of the different guys in the staff. To me, it feels like this is at least partially motivated by what happened in Alabama a year ago, where a young defensive coordinator, Tosh Lupoi, apparently wasn't ready. That's what some of the reports said coming out of Tuscaloosa. Now Lupoi is working in the NFL as a position coach. Do you think there's a chance that Lupoi, the young DC, not working out for Saban, has partially scared Kirby Smart away from wanting to tout his own young defensive coordinator too much?
Well, look, these are tough jobs, obviously, and Kirby appears to be pretty demanding as a head coach as it relates to the assistants. I'm good with that. But, I just think it was a situation where, both of these are young football coaches. They're still growing into the role of being a defensive coordinator. So I'm all for the decision that he made. Schumann and Lanning have done a great job so far as a position coach and recruiters. Obviously, they're very popular with the players on that team. So I think it was really a good decision for him to throw that co-coordinator thing out. And the best I can tell, Lanning will be making the calls on Saturday, game day. But these are young guys. They're still growing into the job. You don't want them to get away. So, I think Kirby probably made a good decision here with the way he went on defense. Offensively, James Coley, gosh, I was hoping that Kirby would go with Coley on offense. And I say that because I didn't want to see an outsider like this Eddie Grand come in. I threw my hands up with him at Kentucky last season with the way they handled their quarterback situation. They were rolling, and then decided they were going to bench Terry Wilson, the starting quarterback, because he wasn't throwing the ball good enough. I just couldn't believe that decision, and that's partly the reason why I was hoping to see Coley get the promotion. I'm hoping Coley, though, will bring in some fresh ideas as far as goal line goes, where they really struggled under Chaney, especially a year ago, and then come up with some imaginative things in the passing game, like maybe even throwing it to the tight end a little bit more than what Chaney got around to doing. So I all in all, I was very pleased with the way it worked out on offense and defense.
Let me do two quick things with you, Buck, before we let you go. We appreciate your time here today on DawgNation Daily. First of all, I think Kirby Smart uses conversations like the one he had with you sometimes to send a message. Certainly seemed like he might be trying to send a little bit of a motivational message to Jordan Davis. You had some words of praise for Davis. Kirby said, I'm a little bit concerned about his weight. That felt intentional to me. That felt like a message of, hey, young man, make sure you build off of what you did as a freshman All-American in 2018. I think it's probably smart for Kirby to do that. What did you make of a little bit of a public challenge from Kirby towards Jordan Davis about making sure he stays in good physical condition?
Well, I'll tell you what I think is you look at the difference between Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson over the last 2 years, and to me the thing that jumps off the page is that Georgia's not where they need to be at the defensive tackle position. They need some impact guys. Look at Alabama. You got Deron Payne coming out as a first-round pick 1 year. The very next year, Quinnen Williams steps in as a beast at that defensive tackle spot. Other than Big 99, I'm not sure who our difference maker is at that defensive tackle spot. So, Kirby, he's all about the motivation and the competing, and I would imagine with the tweak to his back, Davis's back, that kept him out of the bowl game, possibly put on a little bit of weight during that process, and he's just got the needle on him trying to get him ready to go. He looks like, to me, one of the few difference makers they have on the interior defensive line.
Buck, let me finish with this, if you don't mind. There have been some conversations out there. The Augusta Chronicle quoted some players over the course of this past weekend about maybe it's now finally time to give Vince Dooley an additional honor, looking back on his 40 years at Georgia, 25 as head coach, including your head coach for your time there at Georgia, including a national championship in 1980, and then another 25 spent as athletic director. How do you feel as a former Dooley player and a fan of the program and a proud alumnus? How do you feel about the idea that it maybe should be Sanford Stadium at Dooley Field, or Dooley Field, I guess at Sanford Stadium would be the way that it would said? Is this the kind of honor that's long overdue for Coach Dooley?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some politics involved on that with that kind of thing, but this seems to be a no-brainer to me with the impact that he made over a long period of time as the head coach and the athletic director. I'm not sure why this hadn't already happened. So, I'm glad we've got some guys like Herschel getting behind it, and hopefully this thing can happen. It would be a wonderful honor for Coach Dooley, and I think it would be something that most everybody would be behind. So I don't really understand why it's been so difficult, or it is so difficult to get something like that done.
Well, Buck, we appreciate you speaking out on that issue, and we appreciate your thoughts on everything going on with Georgia football right now. We know for the folks in Atlanta, they can hear you on the radio this afternoon starting at noon on the Buck and Kincaid Show on 680 The Fan. Buck, how about finding you on Twitter or anything like that? How can people reach out to you online?
Yeah, at BuckBaloo8, and we're playing along a little bit pretty much every day with what's going on out there in the sports world, especially Georgia football. So, BA, it's always good to be with you, man.
Yeah, Buck, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. That's Buck Baloo there, the great former quarterback of the Georgia Bulldogs, and just a terrific voice, still paying close attention to what's happening at UGA and still reacting passionately to everything that he hears or everything that he sees going on. And that's one of my favorite things here on DawgNation Daily when we are – and listen, I consider myself very lucky to be able to have so many conversations with so many former Georgia players, and they show up on the show from week to week. And I love the way that former Georgia guys still have terrific affection for their program. And listen, friends can disagree. Family members can disagree. Some of the most intense arguments you've probably ever had have been with people that you're either related to by blood or chosen to be close friends with. It's that close proximity to people sometimes that create the extra energy that lead to strong disagreement. So just because you're a proud alumnus and just because you are a proud former player doesn't mean that everyone's always going to have the same viewpoint on things. From time to time, guys are going to come on here and say, hey, here's something about Georgia that I wish was a little bit different. Here's something about Georgia that I think is long overdue to change. And it doesn't make, the connection that all these guys have to Georgia any less solid, that sometimes people have differing opinions on things. And in the case of Buck, he obviously knows what it's like to be in the trenches with Vince Dooley. He won a national championship with Dooley in 1980, a part of multiple SEC championships. And when he looks at that Georgia career, both as a coach and an athletic director, he says, yeah, it's a no-brainer that field ought to be named for Vince Dooley. And the more I listen to guys like that talk, Buck referenced Herschel Walker, the more I listen to Herschel talk about this, the more that I listen to Buck Bellew talk about this, the more I start to think that these guys are starting to make some sense. And I won't pretend to be an expert in the backroom politics about this kind of stuff. Frankly, I think sometimes Georgia has got a little too much backroom politics going on. But in terms of the merits for the tangible accomplishments, both in terms of the way that, as I thought Connor Riley brought up a really good point about this on our R.S. Andrews cool down yesterday afternoon on video, that it's not just the accomplishments for football as an athletic director, but the great non-football coaching hires that were made and the way that the athletic footprint for Georgia was impacted by Dooley at his time there. I think that's an important thing to remember. And, at one point in time, I guess I was kind of agnostic about all of this, not really all that moved to see any kind of name change or anything like that. But the more I listen to some of these veteran guys speak up about their feelings about Dooley, and the more that I start to research and look back on how it was that his time at Georgia came to an end and what was going on around that time, the more I start to think that maybe there's some errors in Georgia's past that need to be corrected. And here at DawgNation Daily, we'll do our part to try to influence that as much as we possibly can. A couple other things from what Buck had to say there that I thought was kind of important. First of all, on the notion of Kirby's statements about the coordinators, and you go to DawgNation.com, Mike Griffith wrote up some of the quotes from what Kirby's had to say. We haven't heard from Kirby much, so just Kirby speaking at all is kind of an interesting thing. But Mike did his part to kind of transcribe some of the quotes that Kirby had to say. And as I said before, for the most part, Kirby just kind of downplays the significance of coordinators. And I know that's kind of an outlier statement based on the way we typically expect college football to go. We do lionize coordinators as much as we lionize head coaches, and in recent years, a lot of these coordinators have moved into really expensive territory. I guess you got, Todd Grantham making close to $2 million at Florida now. Dave Aranda, I believe, makes more than $2 million at LSU. We've had very expensive offensive coordinators as well, although in this day and age, a lot of those guys become head coaches pretty quick. But even though with the money and the attention, it would seem like coordinators are heroes just the same way that head coaches are. For the most part, I don't know that Kirby's wrong when he said, when it comes to the real philosophy and game plan you see executed from week to week, that isn't so much about the calls during the game as it is about the nuts and bolts that were put in place during the week, and that's done by a committee of coaches and not just the one guy who's sitting at the end of the table. And as head coach, Kirby wants to be influential in all of that as well. I think for the most part, Kirby makes a little bit of sense about that. But I did think it was interesting to hear from Buck, a former quarterback, that from James Coley, he wants to see some fresh ideas. I think a lot of Georgia fans are going to agree with that.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So really fun to have Buck Bellew, the great former Georgia quarterback, here on DawgNation Daily today. Loved that conversation with him. We got some interesting stuff on our SEC Through, including a little bit of criticism for a former Georgia star. I'll tell you about that coming up. Before that, let me remind you, we're coming up on another edition of Kroger Chef Jr. And, my kids love the idea of being taught how to cook. They love the guided kids cooking experience, and I think your kids are going to really like this as well. It's kind of a fun thing for families to do on a Saturday. So let me give you the details about the next available Kroger Chef Jr. event, and you can go to KrogerChefJr.com for more details on this. So here's what you get. You get a apron and patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card box, and a spatula, and it's just $7. Now this month, it's chicken salad, which is kind of a cool thing to make. You kind of get your hands messy, kind of get in there on that. You feel like you're doing some real cooking. It's chicken salad this month. The next available date is March 16th. And you can go to KrogerChefJr.com to register and reserve your spot and find the Kroger nearest you that's doing the Kroger Chef Jr. this month. So please make sure you check that out. Really good stuff there from our friends at Kroger. All right, a couple things as far as the SEC Through goes, and we'll give away a Road to Atlanta t-shirt coming up in just a moment. I thought that ESPN kind of had an interesting piece this week, and we talked yesterday, ESPN, and I love off-season content. I love all the lists. I love all the rankings. I love all of that. So ESPN the other day had their top quarterback battles to pay attention to for the 2019 spring practice, and we'll eat that up. And we mentioned what ESPN had to say about Auburn. I said yesterday that I think that's a really important non-Georgia storyline that Georgia fans probably ought to be paying attention to. But to ESPN's credit, leaving no page view ungotten, they now have their most intriguing non-quarterback position battles. So they had their quarterback battles, now it's non-quarterback battles, and there are a couple of SEC names worth mentioning here. First of all, for Alabama, it's the need to replace Quinnen Williams. Quinnen Williams, the just terrific pass-rushing interior defensive lineman, not the biggest guy in the world, but virtually unblockable last year. I think even for a program like Alabama, dealing with his departure, I think there's just going to be a little bit of a loss there. We saw how the Alabama sack totals were impacted by having Williams this year. For a while, Alabama had been 50-plus sacks for a couple of years in a row, kind of dipped down for a moment, and then last year they're back in that sort of mid-40s range again, and Quinnen Williams gets a lot of credit for that. So for Alabama, who's recruited as well as they have, arguably still the top program in the country from a recruiting standpoint, just slightly better than Georgia over the last 5 years probably. Even for Alabama, replacing Quinnen Williams is going to be a challenge, and I think that's probably worth paying attention to just a bit. I don't want to oversimplify this, but we've talked here on this program about Georgia's need to get that 40 sacks number. Would it be too overly simplistic to say the SEC champion between Georgia and Alabama will be the one that generates the most sacks this year? Is that too simplistic? Let me workshop that take just for a little bit. Let me workshop that one just a little bit. But I like the idea of kind of seeing which of these two programs can find that 40-plus number. Alabama minus Quinnen Williams, Georgia with the addition of what we think are going to be some good young pass rushers. Speaking of pass rushers, Florida also dealing with the loss of Ja'Kai Polite. That gets mentioned by ESPN here. They mentioned some of the possible replacements. The kid they transferred over from Louisville, I guess Andrew Chatfield's his name. Jabari Zuniga comes up there. This has been something, going back even to the Jim McElwain era, that Florida really considered itself pretty good at, which was cultivating that next level of pass rusher, defensive lineman, front seven type stuff. That's going to be a challenge for Dan Mullen this year. That gets mentioned by ESPN there. Speaking of spring previews, USA Today also had one involving Tennessee, and the talk there was about the year 2 bump. We see this a lot in college football. We've obviously seen one from Kirby Smart going from 2016 to 2017. We saw this with the previous Georgia coach as well, going from 2001 to 2002. Georgia won 8-01, won the SEC with just a single loss in 2002. It was actually kind of similar to what Kirby Smart did. I think you'll see some year 2 bumps around the SEC this year. I think the Texas A&M is talented enough, all things considered, to be able to do that. I don't believe that Tennessee is, though. Tennessee has recruited better, but I think there are some major problems at some of the key positions for the Vols. Now, bringing in Darnell Wright and Wanya Morris certainly helps the offensive line situation. But when you lose Trey Smith, and it seems like as of now that's exactly what's happened. His career's probably over because of a medical issue, which is incredibly sad. But I think there's still too many holes for Tennessee to be all that much better than it was a year ago. Probably some improvement, but the typical trajectory you see a lot of SEC teams follow, I don't believe you're going to be able to see that from Tennessee, which is going to be interesting to see. How patient can Vols fans be with Pruitt, who is legitimately a good recruiter? How patient can they be if the process is going to take a little longer than maybe they want it to, and a little longer than it has in some other places? That could actually be a really interesting thing to watch, especially given the high-profile nature of some of the assistants that Tennessee's hired this offseason and some of the money they'd spent on them. There's been a lot of noise made from Knoxville, but that is still overall not that talented of a roster. All right, let me kind of slightly transition from the SEC through into something else by also mentioning kind of an interesting thing at Sports Illustrated, looking at some of the guys from the Combine that probably didn't have a great performance. And one of the names that gets mentioned there is Elijah Holyfield. Now, this is what the writer says about Holyfield. Holyfield left Georgia after his junior season. First year of getting meaningful reps after playing behind Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel. And last year he ran for 1,018 yards and averaged 6 yards a carry. Obviously had a really good season. But the 40-yard dash was very slow, 4.76, and the NFL Combine. The writer finished up by saying, no one expected Holyfield to be one of the fastest players in Indianapolis, but he's also not big or bruising enough to justify that slow of a time. Now, this is an example of where I think that the media, for the most part, is being unfair to Holyfield. Obviously, you can't deny that the straight-line speed is not what it's going to be for the elite backs in the NFL draft. But I'm going to take a bit of an issue there with that at the end, that Holyfield's not big enough or bruising enough to justify that slow of a time. First of all, I don't care about big necessarily of the of the backs that did reps, the bench press at the NFL Combine, Holyfield had the third most. So I don't know how big Holyfield is in comparison to other running backs, but he's big enough to be as strong as virtually any of them. When it comes to being bruising and physical, I don't think there's any doubt that Holyfield proved that at his time at Georgia. I mean, the point here is Holyfield's going to be in an NFL roster despite the fact that he had a slow 40 time. But yesterday on DawgNation Daily, one of the things that we did address is when he runs as slow as he did, given the fact that he could have come back to Georgia, and Isaac Nada was kind of in that same boat, is the somewhat, I think even by their own standards, disappointing performance at the Combine. Does that mean these guys should have come back to school? And I actually thought Mike Griffith had a pretty interesting point to make about that yesterday. Here's what Mike said on the subject of Holyfield's 40 time, which got criticized by Sports Illustrated, not kind of in the same boat. Here's what Mike Griffith had to say about that yesterday.
I don't think Holyfield did. I don't think he was going to get any faster, tougher, or stronger. Elijah, I think he's going to make a team because of his toughness and his grit. Maybe not because of what he does in the 100-yard dash or the 40-yard dash for that matter. But I think Isaac Nada would have benefited. And it's easy for us to say this because let's just say BA. Let's just say ESPN came along and said, BA, we're going to give you your own show at whatever time slot you want. You don't got to move your family. You sit right, you do it. You got your dream job. We're going to give you a 4-year deal right now worth $500,000. Or if you wait a year, we might still have it, and we'll pay you $750. I mean, look, the windows of opportunity for all of us, we have to consider. And for these kids, this is something they've been dreaming of. This is a chance for them to do something for their family and change their life. It's like holding a winning lottery ticket. Hey, you just won $1 million, but guess what? There's a 95% chance you're going to win $1.5 million in another year. Hard not to cash that ticket in your hand.
I think that Mike Griffith right there does a pretty good job of laying out what I believe is a really difficult decision for guys like Holyfield and Nada and really any of the other juniors that leave. It's hard to know what to do. If you're obviously going to be a first-round pick, then it's not a tough decision. You definitely have to go. Even for a guy like Roquan Smith, who I think really enjoyed his time at Georgia and based on some reports was maybe tempted to stay, ultimately you can't stay if you're going to be the number 8 overall pick. As much as we would like for that to have been the case, you got to go do that. It's too much money to say no to. But most decisions aren't that obvious and aren't that easy. And for guys like Holyfield and Nada, I do believe they were facing a tough decision. But striking now while the opportunity's there is, for a lot of these guys, ultimately ending up going to be the right decision. The one thing that's true and certainly true for us here at DawgNation Daily is we're certainly excited about seeing what these guys do with the opportunity they've been given because they're going to be great representatives of Georgia at the next level, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from both these guys, Nada and Holyfield and the rest of the juniors that did make the decision to leave on NFL rosters very much in the near future. One more thing before we're done on today's program. So here's our Road to Atlanta t-shirt. We've been giving these away for a while. I do want to say that we are not doing a Road to Atlanta giveaway tomorrow. The reason why is I got a lot planned on tomorrow's show. We're going to be very busy on the program tomorrow, so just going through the motions of being able to give it out, I'm not going to be able to do that. But we will be back to doing one again on Monday. So y'all give me a pause for tomorrow. No giveaway for tomorrow's show, but we'll start doing that again on Monday. Let me, though, congratulate the winner from yesterday. Thank you to Anthony Jackson, who shared our show on Twitter yesterday. We drew his name out of a hat before the show began today. We'll be in contact with you, Anthony. Congratulations. You are our Road to Atlanta t-shirt winner for today, and we really appreciate your support of DawgNation Daily. All right, let me wrap up with a couple of things here on the program today. Had fun kind of taking a jab or two at Florida off the top of the program, so let me follow up with that by saying 859 days, that's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia, and that's a number that Georgia fans like watching climb, and we do that at the end of every show. It's our Gator Hater Updater. It's fun to do that with you on DawgNation Daily, and we'll keep watching that one climb, not just for the rest of this year. We think, though, for many years to come. The other thing I want to mention, I don't quite know what to make about this. Did y'all see the basketball team just got throttled last night by Average's Grits, Missouri? They're not even average. They're bad. I can't decide if this is a big deal or not. It's senior day. You're saying goodbye to a lot of guys. Obviously the nature of this roster is going to be very different moving forward. I don't really know if it's a big deal that Georgia got beat as bad as it did, if that changes the trajectory for Tom Crean. But it was not a good look last night. We'll see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down as we talk about everything going on with our program today, what Buck Ballou had to say, really interesting stuff, anything involving UGA. We'll be kind of free-for-all and give you a chance to do that, and we certainly appreciate R.S. Andrews for making it possible. Heating and air, plumbing, electrical, they're the ones we trust to play all the positions for us here at DawgNation because they do the work right. Their techs are cleaned and screened and trained. They show up on time. You can trust them, and trust is so important when it comes to stuff like this. So please reach out to them online, rsandrews.com. That's rsandrews.com. Really easy to remember. They provide the R.S. Andrews cool down to us right here on DawgNation Daily, and we're certainly appreciative of that. So let me pull up the Facebook comments, and I'll get the YouTube comments going here as well, and we shall chat. Steve Shaffini on the subject of what happened to Georgia basketball last night. He says, whoa, that's a bad loss, rebuilding year or not. And I guess, Steve, that was my initial take on this a bit too, that, ooh, this is eye-opening. This is not in keeping with the narrative of a program seemingly on the rise. I do think that you gotta contrast that a bit with what happened for Kirby Smart in 2016, because there were plenty of media members, local and national, ready to pounce in 2016, whether it be the Vanderbilt loss or the squeak job against Nichols. A lot of ugly performances where a lot of folks were ready to jump in and say, "Oh, Kirby Smart's not going to be better than Mark Richt was," and they're ready to pounce on that. And 2017, with a pretty different roster, was just a way, way different level of performance. So Tom Crean may have the same thing happen for him over the next couple of years as well. But I have to admit that it certainly got my attention that Georgia, first of all, scored as little points as it did, and coming off of what had been a really good win against Florida, had no ability to capitalize on that whatsoever. I don't know. I don't know what to make of all that. Shannon Baker says Holyfield's going to have to improve at his pro day by 15%. He's fifth round pick as it stays now. The other thing about that, though, Shannon, is, and I say this as a certainly admitted non-expert of the NFL, I mean, isn't that where most of the running backs get taken anyway? I mean, isn't fourth round kind of become a running backs round as it is? So if Holyfield could go in the fourth round, it's kind of hard to be taken much higher than that. Now, I know there's some counterexamples, obviously Gurley and some others who've had Barkley from the Giants who've had incredible high-end first-round value, but those are the real outliers. I mean, this is an era in which a lot of organizations aren't spending big on the running back position. So even combine notwithstanding, Holyfield is always going to kind of battle against that just a little bit. I'm sorry, Shannon Baker says it was he means 0.15 of a second on his 40. I apologize, Shannon, for misstating that. I apologize. For misstating that. Let me go over to YouTube for a second, too, get some of the YouTube comments involved in the discussion here today as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. Cliff Payne, on the subject of running backs, also mentions Kenny Mcintosh, saying that he thinks that Mcintosh is a very interesting prospect. His tape shows he's a versatile back, definitely can be used in short yardage situations and as a fullback. I wonder if George is going to use that second back on the field very much at all with anybody, but certainly when you think of that ability to be a running back in short yardage situations, he would seemingly have some value there. But ultimately, I guess I kind of agree with what Buck Ballou said on the program a little bit earlier, that what really causes Georgia issues at the goal line was not the absence of a power back like Kenny Mcintosh. It was a lack of creativity down there where it just became the same kind of let's just run it into the middle of the line play over and over and over again. I mean, what the real beautiful play down the goal line is, if you've got a back that you've got to show some respect for on short yardage situations, the play action off of that and the pass there, I think that Georgia's got to throw the ball at the goal line a little more. If you look at the really successful goal line offenses, pro level, high school, college level, even high school level, I think you see some creativity with play calling. So have the personnel that makes you respect the power run, but then be creative off of that. That's going to be one of the things I think that Georgia's going to be called to do. Dave says, I'm on vacation and still can't catch it live. But I think you're watching us live now, though, aren't you, Dave? Either way, we're glad to have you here. Richard Smith says, how's our placement in the recruiting arena going? I think Georgia's up to 12th or something now after the Carson Beck and Justin Robinson commitments. But, but I would expect Georgia to climb much higher after that. Memphis Dog, thanks for asking. He says, what's up with the birdhouse? So this was a gift given to me. And it was Jack DeLoach who sent this over to me. His family had reached out and said that he wanted to do that, and they were nice enough to get this to me. This is a beautiful piece here, handmade by a guy that he knows, James Corsi. A great-looking birdhouse, a beautiful thing. It reminds me of just a really cool thing. So I'm very thankful to have that, and I was very proud to receive this as a gift. It's kind of fun. It's almost like Christmas when a package comes in. I get some gifts from time to time. I'm actually thinking maybe going to display a few more of these gifts that I've gotten from people. But he said, hey, I'd love to send this to you. And sure enough, it showed up, and I opened the box, and there it was. And I said, you know what, we got to put this on the desk. So really fun stuff, and really appreciate Jack for sending that in. And for all of you who are kind enough to watch every day, we really appreciate that. Jack also wrote a note, and I love one of the lines that he put in his note. He says, I try to keep up with recruiting, and I think this is the year of the dogs. That is a really nice sentiment. So keep that in mind when you look at this. Down in Port Wentworth, Georgia, keeping a good thought about 2019 being a big year for UGA. I love that. Love that. Dallas Schwartz says, B.A., will Coley have a new set of wrinkles, short yard goal line to close out games into blowouts versus last year? So a couple things in that. First of all, one of the topics I'm a little sensitive to is the fact that Georgia hasn't had enough blowouts. I get the idea that the offense wasn't always as aesthetically pleasing to the eye as you wanted it to be, but Georgia has still won every SEC East game the last 2 years by more than 14 points or 14 points or more. That's a pretty comfortable margin of victory week in and week out. But I still understand the overall point that you're going to. I think overall that James Coley was hired to maintain the stuff that Georgia already does well. Georgia's recruited really good offensive linemen. I think Kirby wants to keep that as the strength of the program, and they're going to still run the football a lot because obviously Georgia's got a really good pipeline of running backs too. But I think the consensus, both in terms of video comments, what Buck Bellew said earlier, what we say on this show from day to day, is don't take any of that off the table, but can we add a couple of things to it? Can we sprinkle a little garnish? Can we put a little hot sauce on that? And I've tried to boil this down and simplify it as much as possible. Can you give me 4 more passing attempts per game, and can you give me 2 of those going for deep completions per game? If you can do that to what Georgia's already doing, then I think that changes a lot. And as somebody else was mentioning, whether it be the goal line issues against Florida, the goal line issues against Kentucky, first of all, those were still easy Georgia wins, but it was an example of Georgia just trying the same thing over and over again, at least seemingly. And you hope that Coley also changes that up just a little bit too. Let me get a few more here. Justin Wolf says, I was happy with the offense last year, minus the goal line, and passing game needs to improve. Yeah, I would kind of agree with Justin on that. A little bit of goal line improvement, a little more from the deep passing game, and it'd be hard to imagine this not being national championship level performances. Elite Baller checking out. Elite, thanks for watching the show. Jay Parker and Kirk Warner talking about, some of those adjustments down near the goal line. By the way, we always love having Kirk Warner check in on the program. It's fun to have the former dogs in the comment section. Dapper Dan says, I'm worried the threat of returning kicks won't be great this year. I don't care if we get touchdowns, but I want to make sure we're gaining some positive field position and not just fair catches. I think that Dan's making a really good point there, and I think it's way too early to know yet how good Georgia's going to be in that regard. There's no shortage of candidates, but you want to see the on-field production. I think that, and once again to go back to a familiar topic, I love simplicity. When you can distill things down to very simple notions, I think that's just really fun. And I think one of the simplest stats to understand and one of the most predictive stats to understand in terms of how it's going to ultimately impact wins and losses is average starting field position. Where do you start your drives? Where does your opponent start his drives? That number alone tells you so much, in college football especially, I'm assuming the NFL too, but in college football especially, that number tells you so much about how many games you're going to win and lose. If you want to just look at 2016 and 2017, for instance, Georgia not great average starting field position in 2016, especially compared to its opponents. 2017, much better, and the results were wildly different. That is a very predictive stat, and obviously one of the things that improves average field position is how well you can return punts and how well you can return kicks. One of these days, those plays may not be a part of the game anymore. We've already seen them taken out of the spring football league, and some of that kind of stuff ends up being a precursor to what happens in the real football on Saturdays and Sundays in the fall. So there's a chance that one day there are no more kicks, no more return. But while there are, and they're still eligible in this day and age, while they are, you got to use them to your advantage. And that's also a big reason why, not to open up a can of worms, but that's also a big reason why I like elite players, even guys like Zamir White, on punt coverage teams, because the average starting field position door swings both ways. You add to it by the returns that you get. You subtract from it by the returns that you prevent, and the 11 best players on the field keeping guys from getting returns, I also think is really important as well. Back over here on Facebook, John McMillan says Ben Cleveland's easily going to be the strongest offensive lineman probably overall. The player at the combine, there's no telling what kind of numbers he's going to put up as a combine guy. And I'm really excited about Cleveland. I'm really excited about Cleveland this year, being back healthy and being a part of a big Georgia offensive line. I think it's easy to overlook because Georgia still had a very talented offensive line. But Cleveland being absent as much as he was last season ended up being a big loss. The other thing about Cleveland is he is going into his redshirt junior season this year, right? 2019 will be his redshirt junior season this year. So let's say that he were to choose to stay in the program as a redshirt senior in 2020. Him moving over and becoming a starting tackle for Georgia in a final year. Because remember, Cleveland is very young. Cleveland's always been young for his age, if you follow my point. So if anybody from an NFL draft standpoint would benefit from hanging around Georgia a little longer, could actually be Cleveland. He could move to the more lucrative draft position at tackle, and he could catch up with some of the guys in his draft class who are just going to be a little older than he is. That's another thing I have my eye on for Cleveland, sticking around for that final year, maybe moving to tackle in a year where Georgia's going to need a little depth at that tackle position. I know that's like a million years from now. I do get that, or at least seemingly a million years from now. But when I think about Cleveland, I not only think about him this year as a really, really high-end guard, I think about him maybe hanging around for an additional year and getting a chance to move over and play the position that we always thought he was going to play to begin with, which is the offensive tackle. Connor Riley joins us as a part of the R.S. Andrews cool down.
Yeah, I think if Ben Cleveland is all clear and healthy, and he certainly I think was a difference maker when he was inserted in the lineup in 2017. I think he's someone who's gotten better every single year he's been at Georgia.
I do too.
And if he's able to stay healthy and play all this year, there's no reason why he can't either go be a possible draft pick a year from now, or like you said, return to Georgia his senior year when there might be a potential opening at either one of the tackle spots.
Willie Gray, on a completely different subject, has a really good question. He says, why no fireworks at our games? Not really important, just curious. Now, in this case, he doesn't mean fireworks euphemistically. He means actual pyrotechnics. I feel very much the same way about fireworks that I feel about statues. I've never seen fireworks that didn't deserve a reason to exist. I know that Tennessee does a lot of fireworks stuff, so from this standpoint, it seemed like you were taking from them. I'd have no problem with a lot of pyrotechnic displays.
I want good fireworks, though. None of that just... Like, if you're going to get fireworks, you have to get the good kind. You have to get a strong... Like, you're not... When you don't remember that the fireworks exist and then they go off, you're shaking a little bit. That's the fireworks I have to get.
For the NFL games and for the Georgia SEC Championship Bowl games, things like that, which are typically played in NFL stadiums, you have the flames come up when you're running onto the field. Georgia's got some smoke. Maybe Georgia also needs to add some flames to its run-in at Sanford Stadium. I thought the West End Zone last year was a huge improvement for the stadium entrance. Y'all know I'm kind of a pro wrestling guy. There's something about the way that long tunnel looks that Georgia runs out of now with the LED boards on both sides, the smoke kind of filling the bottom there. There's a little bit of a pro wrestling aesthetic to that to me. If you put the flames on both sides and have that billowing up as Georgia comes on the field, I'd be all in favor of that.
Yeah, big fan of that.
I would very much be in favor of that. Now, the snarky person, were he to be sitting here, would say that in the past, Georgia couldn't use fireworks for its games because you couldn't see them on a noon kickoff. But now that Georgia plays more night games, I also think fireworks, you can just see them better now. And I got to say, I think the fireworks would be a lot of fun. And I mentioned the pro wrestling thing, too. If you watch wrestling now, and I don't get to see it every week, but I try to tune in when I can, it used to be that every wrestler had pyrotechnics for every single one of his entrances. I guess that got to be really expensive because if you watch wrestling on a regular Monday night now or a Tuesday night, or whatever night of the week that wrestling's on now, they don't have a lot of explosions anymore. It used to be that every 2 seconds there was some sort of indoor pyrotechnic display taking place. But the pro wrestling stuff doesn't really have that as much anymore. So maybe college football needs to reclaim some of that.
Yeah, I feel like I need to address something.
Oh,
I need
Lord.
to address an issue. I've seen the comments, and they're not happy that I'm wearing a Boston Red Sox hat.
Are you really wearing a Red Sox hat?
Yeah, a Red Sox fan. And look, the hope is that I will have hopefully a DawgNation hat at some point that I could wear. However, I am aware of your comments. I've had this hat for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I did not just bring this because I'm worried about my hairline. I have zero issues, qualms, whatever about my hairline. When it is time to come, to go bald, I will go bald. I will not fight. Like some people. So, just know I'm aware of your comments. Probably should have, found a Georgia hat, but we're just going to power through it.
I mean, here's the thing. One of the most interesting things about doing DawgNation over the last few years has been that it is very difficult to know who anybody's second favorite team is going to be. And honestly, that's kind of one of those things that I've almost wanted to do like a big survey on. The assumption is if you're hanging around DawgNation a lot, Georgia's at least very high for you on your list of favorite teams, likely your number one most favorite team. But what in sports is your second most favorite team? Honestly, there is no shortage of potential answers. For some people, it's Georgia basketball. For other people, it's like the Detroit Red Wings or, something like that. We've got, people from all over. So I imagine in our audience, maybe not as vocal as some of the commenters, but for some of our audience, in fact, I've even seen this on social media from time to time, there are going to be some New Englander, Georgia fans kind of mixed in there. There's a pocket of Georgia grads that move up to New England and live, and they probably grow to share an affinity for the local teams. I think the problem in particular from your standpoint, though, is that for people who don't have a dog in the fight one way or another, the Boston teams, Patriots, Red Sox, etc., they're just generally unpopular.
Yeah, well, they win a lot, and people like to root against it. And I'm not trying to brag here. They like to root against people who win a lot. But, if you want to question my credentials, what were you doing at midnight last night? I was watching a Celtics-Kings basketball game. So, I'm not one of those just, I tune in when the playoffs. I don't
know what that is, and I don't want to know what that is.
Yeah. So.
I don't know what that is, and I don't want to know what that is. Steve Shavini says, I'm a Yankees fan, actually. Yeah, so, it's actually kind of funny because, I've lived in Atlanta my whole life, so my non-Georgia teams are all Falcons, Braves, Hawks. Now, I've never been as big a pro sports fan as I am a college football fan, so the level of affection for me is nowhere near the same thing. But it's not difficult to know who my other favorite teams are, especially the Braves, which has kind of always been, I guess, my number 2 team in sports. But somebody a minute ago said that they liked it better when you were lurking in the shadows. If you can't see, if they can't see, at least they can't see that Red Sox hat. John McMillan also says bald is beautiful.
Bald is absolutely beautiful.
I'm actually a little jealous of Connor, who gets to wear a hat like this. I mean, if I thought I could get away with wearing a hat, I believe I'd probably wear one every single day because I don't know that bald's going to be quite as beautiful for me as it's going to be for many of you. I've said before I have an odd-shaped head, which is going to make bald a little tough for me, I think.
Dallas Schwartz, Will Scott, bringing up the Braves fans. I'm excited for the Braves season. We were a couple buddies were looking at tickets, trying to go a couple games in April. I'd like to see them sign, the Red Sox closer, Craig Kimbrell, because we don't, Well,
technically that's the Braves closer that was out when the Red Sox for a while.
Braves, the Red Sox, he was great for us. He nearly gave me a heart attack in the postseason. I think if they sign Kimbrell, really like to see them sign Dallas Keuchel, that former Astros pitcher, because I think their starting pitching could certainly use a jolt. But, it's an exciting time to be a Braves fan.
It is. James Bryant says, you make the call. Does BA practice wrestling moves in front of a full-length mirror, true or false? James, I'll be very, very honest with you. My kids right now, 7-year-old boy, 3-year-old girl, are at the perfect age. They like to do a little bit of the wrestling stuff with their daddy, and they're not so big yet, which I can't kind of get them up and really kind of do any move that I want. I can do the overhead press. I can do the body slam. I can even do like the suplex, like a jackhammer suplex, something like that. So there's a lot of that around the house. The kids like it, but it also gives me a chance to live out my dreams as the pro wrestling champion. So if nothing else, have some kids because it gives you somebody to practice wrestling moves on. That's always a lot of fun. Always a lot of fun. Matt Rugavina says, I'm a dog in Texas, BA. Yeah, I've said this before. By the way, Jennifer Caldwell Sperlin says, I was sleeping at midnight. Jennifer, that's what you should be doing, not watching some, Celtics Kings game.
Yeah.
But Matt mentions being in Texas.
It's not a good thing.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people do check in from other states. And I obviously, when we first started the show, I love the idea of being able to keep people company while they're at work and just kind of give them a distraction from their day, get them through traffic, whatever they got going on. I never imagined how many people, though, would use this as a way to stay connected back to the state of Georgia, who are people who are now living other places, all across the spectrum of states. That's always been a really fun thing for me. And, to hear somebody say, hey, I drive through downtown Detroit every day and I listen to DawgNation daily, just kind of that's a really cool feeling for me, and I'm very appreciative of that. Very appreciative of that.
VA, I got a question for you. Sort of related to the Braves, Georgia. I'm going to tie it in here.
Oh, please.
You're a longtime Georgia resident. I've spent most of my life in the state of Georgia. Of let's say the big four teams, I recognize what Atlanta United did, but they're not quite on the fan base level yet of the other professional sport teams and the University of Georgia. Of the Falcons, Braves, Bulldogs, and Hawks.
Yeah.
Which of those teams winning a championship would mean the most to the state of Georgia?
You're going to count Georgia in that mix?
Yeah, I'm gonna lump Georgia into that mix.
I don't think there's anything that would match what it would mean if Georgia won a championship. In fact, that's one of the things that makes the 2017 season, even though the build-up to it all was really fun, when you really kind of got down to and realized it was over, had it gone differently, like the next day, we're all going to Athens and getting ready for what I'm assuming is a parade through downtown Athens. You start thinking about what the route for the parade would be and where's it going to finish up, and you start thinking about all that kind of stuff. And I just think it's really difficult to say how big it's eventually going to be when it eventually does take place. I don't think there's anything that rivals that. And part of me will never quite understand this. I have my theories, but I'll never quite understand why Georgia football means as much to Georgians as it does. Now, I'm going to put aside here Georgia grads here for a moment because all graduates feel very strongly about their school. But the large nature of Georgia's fan base is not built on grads alone. Mathematically, it's just impossible to be that way. That when you look at the outsized stature that Georgia fandom has, a huge pocket of that are not Georgia grads, me included. I'm a Georgia fan, not a Georgia grad. That's what a lot of the Georgia fan base is going to be made up of. I grew up in Gainesville, and it was just a little easier to go to Athens for a football game than it was to go to Fulton County Stadium and see the Falcons play. So that's just what my family did and what my dad's dad did, and that's just kind of how that develops. And I'm assuming there's a lot of that for a lot of other people as well. But Georgia's just a weird place in that you go to most major cities. Atlanta's one of the 10 biggest cities in America, but you go to most major cities, it's one of the pro sports teams that dominates the market, and that has never been the case here, nor will it ever be the case here. Which is not to say that a Braves World Series wasn't big in 95, and Braves Mania in early 90s was huge, and it would be big again. Falcons would obviously be huge. We saw a taste of that when they were in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, but it's just unrivaled to how big it is when Georgia eventually does it. I mean, I obviously long to see it because for so many people, they've just waited for it so long. It's almost like, how can you enjoy it enough that you've waited that long to see it take place?
I'll say, I think the answer is Georgia. I think my second answer is actually the Braves.
I think it is too.
When Georgia lost to Alabama, and I was with a bunch of Falcons fans watching when they unfortunately lost to the Patriots. there were people obviously like mad and annoyed, but there weren't people all that upset. When the Braves, lost to the Dodgers last year in the playoffs, there weren't people that were like really like devastated or upset. Georgia lost that national championship game. I was reporting from a bar in Athens.
Yeah.
There were people like devastated.
Yeah.
Like just tears. People were throwing glasses. It was just a truly just like you look like
we don't condone throwing
no,
glasses.
yeah, but like they were so like just upset with
Yeah.
what had just happened and what had transpired that they just like didn't know how to process or react to it. And it's something I'll remember for a while, and hopefully when Georgia gets there again, I don't see a similar scene. I see the inverse of it, which is a bunch of people very happy.
I mean, I'm sure that I'm exaggerating this a little bit, but having lived through some tough Georgia losses, and gosh knows a lot of us have, you really can feel it in the air the next day.
Yep.
I don't know that I felt Falcon Super Bowl in the air the next day when it was done. And that's a bias, that's a confirmation bias. There's 1,000 things that are wrong with that opinion. But I know what I feel. SEC title game this past year, national championship game the year before that, 2012. You can go back and sort of highlight all these games. And especially for you who spent some of this time living in Athens, I no doubt expect that you felt it even more. You can just feel some of this stuff in the air.
I was not with BA for the night of the national title game. I was with him with the SEC championship game. I can tell you, I don't ever think I've seen someone just more depressed isn't the right word, but just like annoyed at what had just transpired. Like this really just happened again, and hopefully I'm still with him when Georgia, comes through and wins it, and he's the happiest human being I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, you could see me in December after the SEC championship game, just basically sitting on the floor of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, just nothing else really to say. It was tough, and like Connor says, you're just ready for a different story to take place. Amos Williams, on a happier note, asks, so when Georgia does win a national championship, where will the parade be? Will it be Athens or will it be Atlanta? And you got to do the parade in Athens because just so many people in Athens have just they just devoted their life to that. But it does feel like there ought to be a way to get Atlanta connected to this as well, because part of the downtown Athens is a relatively small place. It's like you can circle downtown Athens 4 times in a couple of minutes. Obviously, a parade going through Atlanta gives you a chance for just a longer parade. I mean, I'm assuming that the parade would go through Athens. It would culminate down is it University's name of the street right there where the arches are. It finishes right there at the arches. That's the way the parade's going to go, right?
Yeah.
Or does it finish in the stadium?
I mean, they're definitely going to go down Broad. They might so what they might do is come up Broad, turn left onto like Lumpkin, and then so you go down by like the SLC or MLC, whatever they call it nowadays, the New Bolton Dining cafeteria, and then they will like take a left at where like O House is. I'm getting real specific with Athens geography
this is very
right
specific,
now.
yeah.
And then go down that street and pull like right in front of the stadium.
Do you think that we could get enough Georgians to line 316?
Absolutely. They're gonna have to do like something in Atlanta.
So you line 316, and to go back to Connor's beloved Boston teams, you got the duck boats there. The duck boats are a little bit like if you ever go to Stone Mountain, you can ride the ducks where you can drive the truck and it goes in the water. That's what duck boats do. It's a lot easier to do a parade that way because you can be amphibious. What's the vehicle of choice going to be? Is it going to be an open-air bus? Could you line 316 all the way from Athens to Atlanta? I mean, to me, you got to do something that big to represent the entirety of the state.
Yep.
And it's also going to be one of those things, too, where this is going to last a few days. So this is not going to be one of those Tuesdays, the big day. This is going to be a few days. Mary Martin Corbin loves the idea of lining 316 for that. I mean, heck, the traffic won't be any worse that day than it is most days on 316, for sure. Philip Jordan Wells says, I was in Miami watching the national championship game, passed out, drunk, and depressed. Listen, the thing for me about the national championship was that it was really surreal. It was very hard to believe that that's what was really happening because because, and we've mentioned this before, because of the weirdness of the calendar that year, the national championship game was just 7 days after the Rose Bowl. So, I mean, first of all, you're a little bit jet lagged anyway coming back from California. But you come back from California, and by the time I got back, because of, just flight challenges and things like that, the national championship was like 5 days later. And so you're like just trying to like scramble and get everything together. It's right there in your city. And, I mean, my memory is not, I don't know, it just felt like, we were on the air essentially for full days leading up to that thing. And then it looked like Georgia was going to win. And the rest is, kind of unfortunate history. It was just a very surreal time.
Conversely, I think there's going to be at least it's 2 weeks. I think 13 or 14 days between the college football playoff semifinals this year and the national championship.
Yeah, it's a little bit different.
Because they're doing the semifinals on like the 27th, the Saturday before New Year's, and then they're not going to do it that Monday, but the Monday after.
Enrique Murillo has a good point. So we did our post-game show, just like this year, on the field at the 2017 national championship. But we got to try to find this video. Somebody walked in front of the camera, and as Enrique calls it, was the death stare blooper, because apparently I gave a pretty significant death stare to the person who walked in front of the camera. I was in a bad mood anyway, and I got some Yahoo ruining my shot. So we'll have to pull that out at some point in time. Maybe this is one of these things now where it's been long enough that we can all laugh about that, because I guess that was probably a pretty funny moment. Adrian Carver also says, raise your hand how many people are going to be calling to work the day of that parade when it happens. Here's what my hope is, that this is one of those things that that there ought not be a need to call in for work. If you're a business trying to do business on the day that the Georgia National Championship Parade's taking place, I really don't know what to tell you at that point in time. I mean, kids ought to be out of school. It ought to be a holiday, and it ought to be a couple of them for sure.
You just imagine what Athens is going to be like when Georgia does win a national.
Oh, I can't wait. Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, it's going to be. It's one of those things where, I mean, we may not sleep for 72 hours. It's going to be a lot of fun. Alan McGovern says, it's coming, DawgNation, and there's not going to be anything like this state has ever seen before. That's well said. Well said for sure. Scott Harris said, referencing some of our video bloopers over the years. I mentioned the person walking in front of us during the national championship post-game show. He says, don't forget about the bus driving in front of the dome when it collapsed. Yes, we woke up super early that morning to come in here and do a show, but the Georgia Dome collapsed, and a lot of people had the same thing. This video went viral 19 different ways. But the MARTA bus just drove right in front of that. You never know what's going to happen on these live video channels. Never know what's going to happen. Steve Shavini says the whole state is going to be like College Avenue on Saturday night. You may be right about that, Steve. That's well said. For sure. For sure. All right, we got to get ready to go. Fun comments. Really good stuff. Thanks for being a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making it all possible. Check him out online at rsandrews.com. Our buddy Dari there's a huge football guy, great dog guy. He's been with us on a lot of these DawgNation invasion trips, and you better believe when Georgia wins a national championship, he'll be right in the middle of all that parade talk too. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We'll look forward to that then. We'll have DN90 later on today. I'll be back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. Y'all have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you then.